Hey everyone, it's Karen Thomas here from Port Phillip and Western Port Catchment Management Authority. A lot of you do know me, but for those who don't, I am the Regional Agriculture and Land Care Facilitator. I'm coming to you today from my house. Obviously, with COVID-19 restrictions, not all of us can get out into paddocks, and I decided to further complicate things by breaking my ankle, which means I'm not able to go outside much at all at the moment. So we're going to do this remotely with my section, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of the project. The idea behind this project was looking at other industry sectors that have really strong IPM programs. So they really focus on integrated pest management as a best practice technique for farms, and kind of identifying that in pasture-based systems, this is not something that's well understood or even practiced. And so we kind of set out with the idea of what would this look like on a farm if we actually implemented an IPM program. So this is what started the project. And we started that with a workshop back in October last year, which many of you that are listening today would have been at that workshop. And that was the beginning. And we then set up a demonstration site to implement what we developed at that workshop as an IPM strategy. And we had some really interesting findings with Paul and Jess along the way, which is kind of curveballed the way we did the demonstration site. Lots of exciting findings, which Paul and Jess are going to go into, and obviously some next steps for us in terms of finding some more funding so that we can do some more replicated demonstrations of what we found and see if and make sure that it actually is going to work really well for you as farmers.
Welcome to Orchard End Farm at Bales. We run a multi-layered enterprise here. We do organic blueberries, organic garlic, and run a breeding herd of 40 odd Limousin cows that we put a Red Angus bull over at the moment. The progeny we grow out to about 500 kilos and they go to market at that point. So that's our business plot at the moment. So this is our organic section on the farm. We've got blueberries and garlic down here. Where I'm standing behind here is our main production variety. This is our legacy variety. You can see are well and truly in blossom at the moment, and also got some fruit set. With any luck at all, we'll be picking these guys first week of December. We've planted them on hills to keep them out of the waterlogged soil, and underneath these hills we have a laser guided Aggie pipe with scoria, and then the hills pulled up on top of that. So that keeps the drainage nice and keeps them without their wet feet. So this is our garlic section here. We've got a little bit of an experiment going on here with some elephant garlic. This is our rock and bowl garlic going down through here, but our main production variety is the Victorian purple garlic, which is in the row behind us. We'll be probably looking to dig these guys maybe the first week of December. From there they hang to cure for about 4 to 6 weeks in the shed, and after that they get trimmed up and we start sales from, I don't know, mid-January, somewhere like that. So many of you who've been part of our discussion group for a while will have seen the Wolverine drain from Phil Adams. It's a laser leveled drain that runs the whole length of our property from one boundary to the other, and the exit point for the water on is on the western side of our property. We're about 2-3 years into this drain now. You can see it's a little bit pugged up in the bottom and that, but it's still running water really well, and it's doing the job that it was put here to do. One of the key things about this is that you can get machinery through the drain without shaking the machinery to pieces, and it doesn't destroy the drain as well.
Well, then what happened was Paul and Jess, we had them go out and do some baseline monitoring with the intention that they were just going to go out and find, a few little pests in the pastures, plus some beneficials, and we'd be able to demonstrate that by doing these, different things within the strategy, this is how you can implement integrated pest management without focusing too much on chemical options. So about this biological process and focusing on the biological insects that are out in the pastures. But what they found was that, particularly in one paddock at the demonstration site, they found a huge population of lucerne flea, which led them to actually have a look at the composition of the pastures and starting to look at, implementing an integrated pest management strategy obviously also involves things like what we call cultural control methods, so that you disadvantage a pest and meanwhile provide advantages to the beneficials in increasing their numbers. So Paul and Jess devised a bit of a hypothesis that a way to do that might be to, when the pastures are being re-sown, instead of sowing all of the pasture seeds and pasture composition in one pass, divide it up a little bit and plant the species that the invertebrate pests dislike. So in particular, things like cereals and grasses. And then what that does is starve out those pests into lower numbers because they've not got a species that they prefer to eat. And so then when you're coming in on that second pass and planting those susceptible species like your clovers and brassicas, the natural insects that are out there in the paddock are going to be able to do a much better job and be more efficient at helping to manage those incursions as they happen. And again, you're less likely to need a chemical option to manage that second pass of species that you've planted. So you're basically kind of flipping pasture management away from a chemical dominated use into things like the cultural control methods and biological methods. So it's just a new way of doing things, and we're just experimenting with that through the demonstration site to see if we can show how it works.
Standing in paddock 7 at the moment, we're participating in this IPM Lucerne Flea and Red-Legged Earth Mite trial, and paddock 7 was one of the trial paddocks. The other paddock is paddock 2. We'll spend a little bit more time in paddock 2 than paddock 7. Paddock 7 we did a full cultivation on, so we did 2 covers with heavy discs, put the power harrow over it, and we're planning to air seed the ryegrasses in, and then once they were established, we were planning to air seed the clovers in after that. We haven't yet air seeded the clovers in because of the season. We've ended up with a particularly wet season this year, and we couldn't get the tractors back on the paddock after we planted the ryegrasses. And in fact, I haven't been able to get the stock into this paddock much since it was planted back in April. So we've strip grazed a little bit of the high ground, but where we're standing now hasn't had an animal on it since it was planted. So just in this little section here, we've got Lotus Major still volunteering from the original pasture in here. We've got some winter grass coming through there in that seed head. And we've got the established ryegrasses coming through. What we're seeing from the sampling that Jess and Paul have taken is that there's reasonably low numbers of Lucerne Flea and Red-Legged Earth Mite in here. The baseline had them at reasonably low numbers as well, so it hasn't changed much. We also had field traps in here for the ground dwelling bugs and so on, and the guys had observed a lot of slugs and so on, so slug management's on my to-do list. We're standing in paddock 2 now, and paddock 2 is the one where we've probably got the most data from out of this trial so far. This paddock had a pretty good base clover establishment, and I think that's probably why we are hosting a massive population of Lucerne Flea in this paddock. The renovation method we used in this paddock, rather than full cultivation like we did over in paddock 7, in this paddock we used the soil key from Nils Olsen, and we planted the complete winter mix that Nils usually uses on 2/3 of the paddock, and we took out what we thought was the Lucerne Flea and Red-Legged Earth Mite susceptible plants and planted them in the on 1/3 of the paddock. What we've got here pretty well established is some ryegrass there, some of these clovers, and we've got some small plantain established there. Still a little bit of meadow foxtail coming through. This paddock wasn't as bad with meadow foxtail infestation as some of the other paddocks. So we're standing in the section where the pasture species that we planted in here include only those species that we identified as not preferred by the Lucerne Flea and the Red-Legged Earth Mite. And given that we've had 3 grazings on this paddock already, I don't see a whole lot of difference from one side to the other. I think across the board, the paddock is more usable because of the low impact of the soil key, and the paddock looks healthier overall, but species to species, we're not seeing a whole lot of difference.
I'm Jessica Page, and I'm an entomologist, and I work for a company called IPM Technologies. So we're here today to demonstrate how we do some sampling for insects that we're finding in pasture. So basically we've got a leaf blower that's in reverse, and it has a sock at the end, and we can use that to suck up the insects. What we're really looking for are the amount of lucerne flea and red-legged earth mites, and for any beneficial insects. So there's predatory mites that we're likely to find. This is typical damage that's caused by lucerne flea. You can see that they make these windows in the leaves. It's quite distinctive. So what this is that we did some lab-based trials in addition to the sampling we've done in the field. So I got a selection of the seeds that Tony planted, the pasture mix, and I've set them up in different combinations and exposed them to the pests. So this first one, this is all of the seeds, the pasture mix that Tony gave me. There's a mix of clovers, there's a brassica, a couple of cereals and some legumes. So I got some lucerne flea that we field collected and put them in this container. So I really want to see what their preference is, which ones do they choose first. And it's pretty clear they really only like the clover. So in this one, I've only planted the clovers. I've taken red-legged earth mites and placed them in here just to see how much damage they'll do to the clover. So this is the third trial. So this is the same mix of clovers, but in addition to the clover, I've added a brassica. What we've noticed is this typical red-legged earth mite damage on the brassicas. The difference between the red-legged earth mite damage and the lucerne flea is the red-legged earth mites, it's this silvering type damage, whereas the lucerne flea, they make windows. So the next step, was just the preliminary stage, the next step is to continue these types of trials with different plant combinations.
So what I'd like to be able to do is in next autumn again, is to do this with the soil key again, and probably just repeat the same process. So the non-preferred species here, but maybe update the non-preferred species from what Jess and Paul are seeing, and then put the full species again over on the right hand side.
So ultimately we want to be able to manage the populations of lucerne flea in particular without the use of chemicals and get them back to a level where the beneficials can help to control them and the clover can flourish.
To keep this project going, ideally we'd really like some more funding over a number of years. We'd obviously like to be able to replicate Jess's laboratory testing just to make sure that we get that species composition correct, so that we're planting in those the plants, the species that are less susceptible to invertebrate damage, and have those in the first pass, and then the species that are more susceptible in that second pass. So it'd be great to be able to do that. Plus, we also want to be able to monitor out in the pastures in the demonstration site over a number of years. So, that's going to help us give an accurate picture of what's going on in those pastures. So, funding to increase this program for a couple of years would be our next step.